Hello again, and thanks for waiting. We're going to start. My name is Philip Ozil. I am technical evangelist for Bonita Soft, and I'm here today to talk to you about Bonita BPM and ECM and how you can couple these two systems to be efficient with your business processes. So I will base my presentation on three different topics. I will start first with explaining a bit why you would want to couple Bonita BPM with an ECM. So present a bit both systems. I will explain the advantage, the benefits you can get by coupling these two systems. Then I will talk about the different aspects of integrating an ECM inside Bonita BPM. So I will present different scenarios, different methodologies to integrate an ECM with Bonita BPM. And finally, I'll show a demonstration of an integration with Bonita BPM and alfresco. So I will effectively replace Bonita BPM document management with alfresco. So first, let's talk a bit about why one would want to replace or to use an ECM with Bonita BPM. And we'll start with a very short definition about what is an ECM. An ECM is an enterprise content management system generally, but it's not just a system. The term applies to, in fact, strategies and tools. And there's a whole range of different actions you can perform with these tools. You want to capture, manage, store content. You will also collaborate around it. All of these content is related to your processes in your company generally. So there's a fairly large definition. In this webinar, we'll focus mainly on systems, so we'll talk more about software. We won't talk much about methodology. So some people are reporting the quality is not okay. Is that? I'm trying to see. Yeah, the volume is not that high. Okay, I hope you can hear me well. I'll try to do my best. All right, thanks. Okay, so I was saying, yeah, we will only focus on software. We'll put aside methodologies, and we'll focus on two main aspects of ECM systems here. We'll say that ECMs provide the features related to content management and collaboration. That's a way to share documents between collaborators. It's a way also to edit them, to transform them, and we'll talk about also the basic capabilities that this ECM provides for workflows. So for example, publication, validation. There are some limited workflow capabilities that are built in ECM systems. They're not comparable to business process management solution, but generally there's a couple of steps you can take with a couple of interaction around documents you can perform. Now let's talk more about our software actually, about Bonita BPM. In Bonita BPM, we do have some ECM built-in capabilities. Of course, these are limited. We're not a dedicated ECM software, so we can provide capabilities out of the box to deal with content storage. So we have a way to store documents along processes, and we also have a way to handle version of these documents. So that's really the basic, and the reason why we provide these capabilities is basically to have something out of the box for quickly starting up projects, but it's in no way something that aims to replace an entire ECM system. So you can have software vendors which are very specialized in these tools. So we will just really provide that as a convenient way to start your projects. And depending on your use case, you might want to switch to something bigger. So this is now what I'm talking about, the rationale of coupling your process engine with an ECM. So why would you want to go further? Why do you want to store documents in a dedicated tool? So there are two main aspects, and I will detail those two in the upcoming slides. You would want to switch to an ECM for flexibility on content management features. That's one of the main reasons. As I said, we only have two features around documents. We store them and we handle versions in Bonita BPM. But you may want to have more than that, so that's a valid reason to go for an ECM. And also, why would you just want to use a BPM next to your ECM if you already have some workflow capabilities? Well, you might want more flexibility on the processes that deals with your content. So As I said earlier, ECMs generally have some built-in capabilities to have some interactions around documents, but these are fairly limited. They're not standardized, and sometimes you want more flexibility. So that's a valid reason for coupling your ECM with process management solutions such as Bonita. So let's see more in detail. Firstly, the benefits to Bonita. So when you put in place an ECM integration with Bonita, basically you'll win a couple of features that ECMs are designed for. The first thing is scalability for large volumes. As I said earlier, Bonita BPM can handle documents, but it's not designed to store large amounts of documents. So at some point, you'll reach a critical mass in which an ECM would be better to handle this large volume. The other thing that we really do not do in Bonita BPM is custom indexing and search engine. We can search on process data, but we cannot search on documents themselves. So that's a pretty good reason to have something dedicated to search on your documents and index their content based on tags and things like that. Have an intelligent search engine, and ECMs are pretty good at that. That's one of their main purpose, to find easily documents and to collaborate around them. Another thing that is also important is managing the content access rights. With Bonita BPM, basically you have access rights which are associated to the process execution, but when you want to collaborate and exchange documents that are bound to a process with people which are not interacting with the process, you'll have to do a bit of coding, you have to do a bit of configuration, but it's not as straightforward as you would have a dedicated UI in an ECM to do so. And lastly, ECMs provide generally a range of tools that are natively integrated for handling documents or content. For example, we have tools to transform documents. We can easily transform a Word document in a PDF. We can also do some real-time collaboration, so you can work with 2 or 3 people on the same document at the same time. All of this, of course, could be possible with Bonita BPM, but it would require a bit of integration, a bit of preparation. It's not out of the box because we're not entirely focused on documents. So it would require a bit of integration. So all of these reasons, and I'm sure I'm just giving you some examples here. There's plenty more, but these are, I think, the main ones. Really are worth integrating an ECM with Bonita BPM. Now let's have a look at the other side. When you're having an ECM already, why would you want to use a BPMS? Why do we want a business process management solution next to it? Well, this would allow mainly to gain flexibility on content management processes, meaning that generally these systems have a couple of workflows for limited validation and maybe publication, but they might be customizable up to some point, but it's not total freedom. So we believe it's your enterprise, it's your business process, you know how to handle them, you know how to model them. So by having a BPMS next to your ECM, you really have total freedom, and you can use standards such as BPMN to model these. This really gives you a great flexibility if you want to change these processes, and also if you want to document them. BPMN is something everybody can understand, almost. So that's one of the main advantages. You get a lot of flexibility. Also, when you use a business process, you can control easily your collaboration, meaning that you know precisely to which person you assign tasks, and you can easily dispatch actions on documents, such as reviewing documents, and you can automate a couple of steps, such as the sending out reminders or sending out emails of your content. This is very easy to do with a BPMS. And lastly, you can also automate a couple of things with simple processes by drawing some routes on your processes. You can interact with external systems. So, for example, you could send out emails with your document content, but you could also extract information from your documents and place them in business databases for reporting. So you can do a bit of transformation there with BPMS. So now that we've seen the advantage of having both systems work together, let's now talk a bit more about the integration. How is it possible to make an ECM work with BPMS? So we're going to study the different integration types here. And to put very simply, there are two ways to integrate the two systems. You can integrate more on the Bonita BPM side. So you would have the engine on one side and you would communicate with your ECM either with CMIS. That's a standard. I will explain a bit more in the upcoming slide. That's Content Management Interoperability Services, CMIS, or any other protocol that is proprietary maybe to your ECM provider. That's the first option. Or you could also work more on the ECM side, and you could have inside your ECM a bunch of custom code that communicates with a remote or local Bonita engine through the Bonita APIs. So that's the two main integration options. I will detail, of course, more on this in the upcoming slides. But first, let's talk a bit about CMIS, Content Management Interoperability Services. So that's something that is very, very powerful. It's an OSS standard since 2010, and it's something that describes all kinds of interactions you can have with a content repository. So all operations such as browsing, modifying, tagging, accessing properties of your documents, all of this is inside CMIS. So when you have CMIS capabilities, for example, in your BPMS, you can be pretty confident that you can connect to all of these different systems. Here I have given you an example of different ECMs that support CMIS connectivity. So this means that these can be changed on the fly. They all respect the standard, so you can access and you can perform operations without having custom code that only works on one of these systems. The same code will work with all of these systems. So I will use that in the demo when I work with Alfresco, and I will use CMIS, and I'll show you how you can interact with these systems. So let's start now with really the integration scenarios. So when you work on the Bonita BPM side, which is generally, I would say, the easiest part, you have different options. The first one, which is the most obvious and I would say the recommended path for most use cases, is to use CMIS connectors. We provide out of the box in Bonita BPM a set of CMIS connectors. Here I have shown them in a screenshot. There's a couple of operations you can perform on a CMIS repository. These are fairly basic operations, but these can cover most use cases. You can manipulate documents, uploading them, deleting them, moving them around. So that's fairly convenient. You don't have to code anything. You just have to configure these connectors and you can place them at different places in your processes. This, of course, has a really small impact on your process design because you only need to place your connectors at the right operations when you want to change your documents. I will demo that, of course, in the last section of this presentation when I'll show the integration example with Alfresco. Now, if that is not enough, if unfortunately your ECM is not compatible with CMIS, or if you find some operations are missing from the list of provided connectors, you can work with your own extensions. Here there are three types of extensions in Bonita BPM that you can use to connect to your ECM. You can either use a custom connector, so you can implement a custom connector using Java code, or you could work with a custom REST API extension. If you're more on the user interface side, you can work with a Groovy-based REST API extension. And lastly, you can also create your custom widget using AngularJS and HTML. I will also demonstrate a custom widget in my demonstration. So these are the different extension points that you can use inside Bonita BPM to connect to an ECM. But if you want, you can even go further than just plugging in your ECM at process design time. You can work with another option, which is fairly more technical. I think that's the most technical aspect here of integration. You can work at the execution engine level. Let me give you a bit of background on that. Basically, the Bonita BPM execution engine is a collection of modular services. And one of these services is called the document service. The way it works is basically you have an interface. So that's a set of operations that are described. That's what you see here, document service here, with it's actually a Java class with a package. And we provide one implementation for this particular service out of the box. We provide a document service imp, that's the standard that is shipped in Bonita. And this standard implementation relies on the Bonita database. So we're storing effectively any kind of document inside the Bonita database. So you're free here to rewrite the service. It needs to, of course, to respect the set of operation provided by document service. And you could write your custom implementation here that connects directly to your ECM without going through the Bonita database. You no longer need to go through this. You can directly store your documents and push them to the ECM. So that would require a bit of a Java implementation effort, of course, because it's the service has tens of different operations like accessing document lists, publishing content, removing some, querying content. So you have to, of course, to implement all the operations described in document service. But the advantage of following this path would be that it's completely transparent for process designer after that. Because anytime they manipulate documents in their process definition, in fact, when it's coming up to runtime, the documents are directly stored in the ECM. So we would no longer need to configure connectors. It would directly push documents to the ECM. So it's a bit of effort, but the value of this is quite high. So that's it for the Bonita BPM side. These are different options. You can use, again, the CMIS connectors, your own extension points, such as custom connectors, REST API extensions, widgets, or you can even go further and replace the document service from the execution engine. These are the different options you have on the Bonita BPM side. Now let's switch to the second side. Let's switch to the ECM side. Of course, what I'm going to say is it's fairly generic because I'm not talking about one particular ECM here. So I will try to cover a bit the different points without naming a specific implementation here. So the first thing you can do actually when you're on the ECM side to integrate with Bonita BPM is to hook Bonita BPM on some events from the ECM. So that can be, for example, when you add a document, when you upload a document, when you modify it, when you remove it, you can trigger some actions on Bonita BPM side. And here I did a bit of research. One of the integration aspects you can use, for example, if you're working with alfresco or rules. So that's the terminology. Of course, each vendor has its own system, but generally every ECM vendor has some hooks to trigger actions on some events, on content. So that's rules for alfresco, but it could be another term for another ECM. And the way you would trigger action on Bonita BPM side would be to use the Bonita APIs to maybe start a process when a document is uploaded, for instance. Another options here for integration with an ECM could be also to replace entirely the built-in workflows that the ECM provide out of the box by Bonita BPM processes. So each time you want to generate a document, you want to validate it, you want to publicate something new, you could use Bonita processes directly from the user interface of your ECM. That's something that is quite technical and it requires a lot of knowledge because you need to be familiar with your ECM implementation and you also need to be familiar with Bonita BPM. So you need to integrate custom buttons basically in the ECM user interface, and you would also need a single sign-on to communicate between the ECM and Bonita BPM for user authentication. But it's something that is possible, and we have actually a partner, a Bonita partner that did it for Liferay, and the tool they propose is Bonita Live. So it's just an example. What they did here is basically they replaced the built-in workflows in Liferay to trigger Bonita processes directly from the Liferay user interface on documents. So they created something that allows to validate content directly from within the Liferay interface. And you can assign tasks to users. They did a nice portlet to do that. So that's something that is possible. Of course, it requires a lot of work. I think this last option is probably the most advanced one in all the different integration options I gave, but it's the one that is maybe the more integrated in terms of user interface. But it's not necessary to go as far as this to have both systems work together. So that's it for the theoretical part. Now I'm going to switch to the actual demonstration, and I will show you in practice what you can do with Bonita BPM and Alfresco. I'm not going to demonstrate all the different integration types, but I'm going to cover some points, at least for the basic scenario with connectors and widgets. So I will now switch to my studio and I will present you my demonstration. Here we go. So I'm now sharing my Bonita studio here, and I'm going to talk first a bit about the process I'm going to show you. I have reused here the expense report process that is actually provided as an example process in the fresh installations of the studio. You can actually find them from the studio homepage in the example. This is based on this one, the expense report. Of course, I have customized it and have changed it, but the basic process you can find here, expense report. So back to my process. What this process does, basically, it allows an employee to fill an expense report with some expense lines and reasons and costs. And then a manager will review these reports, this report, and decide whether or not he approves it and transfer it to accounting. So I changed a bit the basic process because the basic process was working with Bonita documents that are stored in Bonita database. So I changed this basic process to use alfresco. So I'm now pushing the uploaded documents onto alfresco. So I'm creating a nice folder with the documents for each specific reports, and I'm reviewing the documents from alfresco. So I've changed a bit the way it works. And I'm working with alfresco community, and here also this is Bonita BPM community edition. So nothing's particular here, nothing related to subscription edition for now. So I'm just going to connect to Alfresco to show you what I have done. Right. So I have created on my Alfresco side, I have created a Bonita repository, and I have placed an expense report folder here that will store my expense report. So for now, it's completely empty. And I'm going to run the process with you, and you can follow as it goes. The documents will be pushed there. So I'm just going to run that. Takes a bit of time for the first run, and here we go. So that's the process here. I have used the user interface from Bonita BPM 7. You could do the same with version 6 or earlier. There's nothing specific to version 7 here for now. So I can provide a summary for my expense report. I would say, well, last week or a couple of weeks ago, I was in Paris. So I would say Paris Open Source Summit. Labels, so I have some, well, I had a lunch there. I have a bill for my lunch here. That's a PDF actually, so I pay like something like $15. And I'll add another bill here for my hotel bill, PNG to change, and something like $130. So here I have completed my expense report, and I'm going to start my process. So right now, where I am in the process, I'm filling up my report, and when I'm going to click submit, I'm going to move forward in my process execution. So I'm starting, and while this is starting, so it will go to the first automated step here, upload bills to Alfresco. What we have here on this particular step is we have a connector, at least one. So let's have a look into that. We have connectors actually on the output of the task, and we have placed two connectors. You may be familiar now with the logo. The logo here is the logo from CMIS. So we're using two CMIS connectors. We're using a first one to create a folder for the reports, and we're using a second one to upload the bills to this particular folder. So the different scanned elements I have uploaded in the first form will be placed in the Alfresco folder. So let's just check that. Now if I go back to my Alfresco, I'm looking at my expense report. I'm just going to hit refresh on this one. And we now have a folder with just name. Is not very sexy here, but it's one because that's the first expense report. If I open my first expense report, I will find my different documents there, the ones I uploaded in my process. Now let's have a look now at the connector configuration. I'll look actually at the second one, which is a bit more interesting because it uploads documents. So let's open it. So what am I doing? Well, I'm doing a first operation here to configure my connection to VCMIS to Alfresco, because Alfresco, as I said earlier, supports CMIS. You no longer have to directly go through specific connectors that are created for Alfresco. You can use the generic CMIS connectors to connect to it. And here, that's the particular settings we're using. We have a username, we have a password, we have a repository name. We're using the Atom Pub mode. That's the mode that is compatible for CMIS. And we have provided a parameter for the URL. So notice here I'm using parameters. So that's also something you have in Bonita BPM that is quite handy. Basically, each time you want to connect to a system and you're using the same system multiple times, you don't want to copy over and over again your connection parameters. You want to have them in a centralized place. So in the process configuration, you have something called parameters. And this allows you to declare the parameters only once. So here I have reused my different parameters for my CMIS repository, and I have placed the URL of my CMIS repository. So that's Alfresco, in fact. I've given a password, the repository name, my username, and I also given the root folder for my expense report. So every expense report will be under /bonita/expense report. That's the folder we saw here, /bonita/expense report, and actually one which is the current expense report we're looking at. So by using this process, I have centralized my configuration, and if I were using the subscription edition, I will be able to live update them without having to change my process definition. But here in this case, you won't change them. But let's look back at the configuration. So we have configured the connector with these different settings. We have specified the documents we're going to upload. Yep, come on. Sorry, it takes a bit of time. All right, so we have provided the list of documents that were uploaded in the first form. So these are the scan bills, and we have computed the path where we want to place the folder. So we have actually generated a path from the parameter called reports parent folder. That's the parameter you saw /bonita/expense reports, and we have used data from our expense report to get its ID. So this generated for us the nice path. So that's /bonita/expense report /1, and we placed our documents there. I didn't get any output parameter, but I can get the IDs of the documents that were created in CMIS if I want to modify them later. Here I didn't go as far as this, but I could also grab them. So that's what we did. We created a folder here and we pushed the documents to it. So now let's have a look at the next step. And the next step, I will show another type of integration. So going back to my Bonita BPM portal, I can also validate my own expense report. Of course, this doesn't make sense. Normally it should be my manager, but I'm able to do it. So here we can move to the review report tasks. So let's do that. I'm gonna do it. Here, notice that I have a pop-up here saying we have to authenticate on Alfresco. So I'm gonna provide my authentication here. That's actually admin and pass. And this will allow me to connect to my Alfresco directory. Here we go. So what is new in this form, for those of you who already did play with the example, is that I have placed a custom widget here. This custom widget was the one that triggered my authentication request to connect to the Alfresco directory. And this your scan bill is actually the view that is represented here. So we have created a custom widget that is focused on just this particular folder, and that allows us to open the different files here. So if I click on lunch bill, it will allow me to download my lunch bill, and I can look at my lunch bill. Of course, we could extend this custom widget to be a bit more integrated, so it could open the document directly in the page, but this is just a basic example to show you that you can also interact with the ECM on the user interface side. All right, so the other part of the interface is just the standard compared to the example. I haven't changed much here, but this is just to show you that you can interact on the user interface side. Because we're just using actually REST calls to fetch the content of the repository, so we don't need to go advanced solutions to just browse it. So these are the different options I wanted to show you today. These are, I would say, the simplest ways to interact with an ECM, but I have given you some examples which are more advanced. So I will go back to the slides, I will conclude, and then I will take questions. So if you want to ask questions, please start to type them in question box. So to conclude, during this presentation, I have presented you the different benefits you can gain from having an ECM working together with Bonita BPM. So we saw that it is perfect to store documents and to collaborate more on documents outside of business processes, and to store large volumes, to have a dedicated search engine, and also transform documents easily. By the way, this just reminds me that with the next version of Bonita BPM, we will release some new connectors to play with Office documents. That's something that has been asked by the community for some time, and we'll release a set of connectors that allow our users to generate actually Office documents such as Word files from a template. So you'll be able to dynamically inject content inside a Word template and generate a Word document, and we'll also provide a second connector to transform this into a PDF. So there's going to be some novelties here in connectors with Bonita 7.2 beginning of next year. So that was just a small parenthesis. I'll just go back to the conclusion now. And after showing the benefits of the coupling of these two systems, I have also given you some leads on the different integration options. I have shown you how this can be done with alfresco also. So I've given you an example of using connectors and custom widget with alfresco. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will now take questions. Just before you ask, this webinar has been recorded, and we will send the recording in a follow-up email. We just need to clean it up a bit, so leave us a bit of time and we will share this webinar. You can follow us on Twitter at Bonita for Philippe myself. You can also visit us on our corporate website, bonitasoft.com. You can also join our community. So here you can benefit from questions and forums, community.bonitasoft.com, and you can also download Bonita BPM Community Edition from our website. So thank you all for attending, and I will now jump to questions. First question, actually it's not really a question, but it's a remark. Alfresco has a BPM and 2.0 compliant BPM engine. Yes, that's true. It's actually named Activity. Why was I proposing Alfresco? Well, because it's an open source ECM. Of course, it's just an example. You could use another ECM, interact the same way with CMIS connectors or something. Activity, however, hasn't been updated since some time, since Alfresco bought it, so it could be a good option to replace Activity with ourselves, Bonita BPM. Another question, which single sign-on technology is used in Bonita Live? I'm sorry, I'm not into the implementation option. So you can have a look on their website maybe and ask them, because I don't know actually about how they implemented it. Another good remark, in the example I gave with the expense report, if I go back to my expense report, I uploaded my documents in the original form by using a contract with lines and scan bills here. And actually, these scan bills were actually saved to Bonita documents. So what I did when I instantiated my data, actually here in documents, I have created a document called scan bills. And yes, in this particular case, the documents were stored temporarily in Bonita database. Now, if we wanted to be very clean, yes, we would have to delete them. We have APIs that allow us to delete them. So what I could do is basically on this particular step, after uploading my documents to Alfresco, what I could do is I could do another operation saying scan bills and actually set document list to an empty list to delete them. So that would be doing a bit of cleanup just after uploading them so that we don't duplicate content. I didn't go this way because I wanted to do it very quickly, but yes, you should do that if you want to be very clean. Another question, can you interact with the ECM by directly inserting the alfresco page widget as an iframe? So most likely, yes, you could do that. There will just be some cross-scripting issues about that. I haven't tried it, but that's something you could try to do. So for everybody, to maybe to clarify a bit, what was suggested is basically taking this particular page and inject it as an iframe inside the form. So yes, you technically it's possible, but it will be a problem with the cross-scripting of between the form, the Bonita form, and the content of the repository browser. And you would need also to log in, and so it might not be easy because you may not have the option to directly position the repository on the right folder. Good question. Now, how about the transactional aspect of connectors? What happens if the ECM is offline? So, if for any reason one of the connectors fails, so here, for example, if we fail to create the folder, maybe because the folder already existed, or maybe the alfresco was down, what would happen is basically we would mark the connector as failed. Now, depending on which edition of Bonita BPM you're in, you can use the APIs if you're in Community Edition to rerun the connector, or if you are on the subscription edition, there's an error management feature which allows you to replay connectors. So you're able to replay the connector and re-trigger the upload. So this would allow you to fix the error, to re-execute the missing connectors. And same thing, if only one of the two connectors works, for example, if you are able to create the folder but not upload the bill, only the second connector will be marked as failed. Another question, someone here is using Google Docs. So we are too actually in Bonita, we are using also Google Docs. And how is the integration of Bonita BPM with such document possible? So it is possible. The main challenge here you would have to face is the single sign-on because Google Docs are only web-based. So you would have to use connectors which can authenticate into the user account to place documents on his behalf. So that's not something we did. We never did that ourselves, but technically it's possible. And I think the biggest challenge would be with a single sign-on. Another question, what single sign-on could we have used to make the example work seamlessly? So without the logging pop-up with the widget, for example. Well, there are plenty of single sign-on on the market. I'm not an alfresco expert, but on Bonita BPM side, we recommend CAS. That's, that's CAS. That's actually a single sign-on that we provide integration by default in our subscription edition. So you don't have to, you have limited configuration, no implementation to put that in place. And I'm quite sure alfresco is compatible with CAS. Another question, any live installations in company already available? Well, yeah, we do have customers which have integrated with ECMs, and at some point when you have a serious project, you're forced to integrate with an ECM. I have an example in mind. I cannot give the name of the customer, but it's a government, a local government, which is Bonita to create an e-government solution for its citizens to allow them to declare their taxes using Bonita. And so everybody that interacts with the government, either by paper or by electronic ways, such as their website, will send documents, scan documents. And they used an ECM behind Bonita to store all these documents for legal reasons, because we have to archive everything, and we have also security in place to separate the processing of taxes from the legal documents. So that's just one example, but it's just for very large volumes here. We're talking about, I think it was 400,000 citizens declaring their taxes. So, and it works pretty well. I don't know what's the ECM behind, but I know we're not using Bonita, of course, for this amount of volume. Another question, how can I know more? Is there any specific training, for example, on the REST APIs extensions or things like that? So there are some dedicated training we propose on the website. You can actually have a look at the training program either on our website or from the homepage of the studio. We propose a set of trainings there. There's no, I don't think there's no free training available on this particular subject. You could have a look at some examples. We do have examples on the community website presenting you custom REST API extensions. So you could have a look at that. They're documented. You can also have a look at our documentation, which explains how to create such REST API extensions. Apart from CMIS and alfresco, do you provide or sell native connectors for other content management systems? No, not specifically, but we can create some with our experts. We sell services around Bonita, and we have a field of consultants which can help you on that. It's not technical really to create connectors. Of course, it requires Java knowledge, but it's not complicated at all to create connectors for any specific ECM, because ECMs are just like Bonita BPM. They're open to the outside world. They're generally integrated with other systems, so they provide APIs to interact with their content. And I know that on some occasions, we developed for customers some specific connectors for their systems. So maybe not their content management system, but at least their ERPs and things like that. So it's something we can do, and we offer as expertise. We're not packaging them directly in the product because it's maybe not interesting for the whole of our users, but we can do that. Another question, do we have experience with ECM called Elo? Not myself, but I heard that from some of my colleagues consultants, so I know we did something with Elo in one of our projects for our customer. Another question, can we use documents from SharePoint? Yes, you can use documents from SharePoint. That's a quite often requested feature actually, because SharePoint has a large market share in ECMs. I haven't demonstrated here because I don't have a SharePoint license, but it would work exactly the same way as I did for Alfresco. You could use CMIS because Alfresco is compatible with CMIS. So you would just use the same connectors I did. You would use the CMIS connectors. So that's any of these connectors here. You could use these connectors to work with SharePoint, same way you would use with Alfresco. I have another question which is not exactly related to your current topic, but I will still answer. Is it possible to synchronize users from Active Directory? So of course, if you're talking about SharePoint, yes, you would need to synchronize your user because most likely you will have also Active Directory. And we provide a tool in our subscription edition called the LDAP Synchronizer, which allows to synchronize an Active Directory with Bonita BPM users. But it's in subscription edition, it's not in community edition. Another question. What happens if, I already answered to that, but let me maybe rephrase. What happens if one of the two connectors fails? So for example, here, what happens is if, for example, the folder was created, but you failed to upload the bill. So would there be a rollback? There's no automated rollback on that. We cannot undo actions that were performed on external systems. So for example, if you are sending an email, we cannot call back an email. But what you could do is you could have an error event leading to an automated task that could do the rollback. So what happens is that if you have a failure in one of these connectors, it triggers an error. The error would lead to an alternate path, and in this alternate path, you could delete the folder if you want to. Or you can, of course, do that manually if you need to. Another question, will I share the project source code? So this has been asked a couple of times. Unfortunately not. The widget is a candidate for a subscription widget, so I'm not going to share it. The process itself is an example, and the connectors, the CMIS connectors, are already present on all installations. What I have done recently, however, is sharing the settings. So if you want to play with Alfresco, you can open our documentation. That's documentation.bonitasoft.com. If you look for CMIS, I have added an example explaining the configuration to work with Alfresco, for example. If you want to create a folder, it's now detailed, and that's the particular part, but it's a bit difficult. You want to have the right settings. So here, these settings are documented here, and once you know how to use one of these connectors, you can work with any of them. It's very easy. A more example, another question related to error management. So how would you catch an error from the external system? Well, that's fairly easy because if the system is well designed, basically when you perform an action on their API, it will report the error. The error will be reported in the connector, and the connector will be moved to failed state. So that's fairly standard. I mean, if you perform an API request on your ECM and the ECM fails, it should report the error back in your API. So you have the way to know what happened. Another question, do we have specific examples in manufacturing environment for ECM integration? Let me think. No, I have banking, but I'm sure there are some use cases. I just don't have one right now on top of my mind. The most use cases are for administrations, banking, or for companies, telcos, companies dealing with telecom for billing customers. But for manufacturing environment, you could have, I don't know, storing schematics of parts. Actually, I do have one. Sorry, I just remembered me. That's actually, this one is public. We are working with Areva. Areva, a French company that builds nuclear plants, and Areva is actually using our software, Bonita BPM, to to um, to provide feedback on the documentation of their next generation nuclear power plants. So that's kind of manufacturing, because they're building nuclear power plants and they use an ECM combined with Bonita to do documentation reviews on their ECM power plants schematics. Okay, so for the people who just came late, I'm going to restate that again. Don't worry if you missed part of the presentation. Again, it will be sent in the follow-up email. So we have recorded this, and we'll share it in a couple of days, time to clean the video, and we'll share it. Another question which I think I answered already, but is it possible to trigger a process on Bonita Soft by creating a document on the ECM? Yes. Of course, it depends on your ECM, because it's on the ECM side. If we're just talking about alfresco, there's something called rules, which allows you to have a custom hook on some events. So when you place a document on a folder, you can create a rule, and it will trigger some code, and you could play with Bonita APIs to start a process out of that. That's something we already did for customers. And another question, I think, yeah, maybe I didn't say it clearly, but there is no difference between the community edition and the subscription edition for the CMIS connectors. You have the same capabilities in terms of connectors here, at least for CMIS. It's not true for all the connectors, but for CMIS, these are the same ones on both sides. All right, I think I answered most of the questions, and I'm sorry if I haven't answered all of them. You were quite a few number. We wish actually 100 attendees. So I would like to thank you all for having attended this webinar. I think everybody learned a lot, and I hope to see you on another webinar. So thank you all for joining in, and see you soon. Goodbye.